Blackbeard is going to be the next king of the One Piece world. The man destined to replace the despotic leader of Emu after their almost 1,000-year reign. Or at least that's a claim that a lot of One Piece manga readers are making nowadays. Because while the God Valley incident arc has been great for a lot of things, like giving us Rox's backstory, showing us just how strong the man who was able to reign over Whitebeard, Kaido, and Big Mom simultaneously was, but more than anything, Harold and Rox's backstory, which have been told to us over the course of the last 20 or so manga chapters, have shown light, really for the first time in One Piece's history, on the existence of the Davy clan. See, because while we've understood the existence of the Davy clan pretty much ever since around chapter 230 of the manga, outside of the fact that the Davy family existed and that somebody named Davy Jones was once a legendary figure that inspired the Davy Backfight, a tournament of games that pirates could compete against each other in order to try and steal important and powerful members from each other to recruit to their own pirate crews, we basically knew nothing about the Davy family. That is until now, because the God Valley incident not only revealed where the Davy clan lived, who they were, but also why they were actively being pursued by the world's government. And while 100% of the details surrounding the Davy family are yet to be revealed, I think we now know enough about the family that I can sit down and try and give you all the information the manga has ever given us to paint the best possible picture of what's going on with Blackbeard, what was going on with Rox, why the Davy family was pursued, and what all this has to do with the Davy family ruling the world. And thus today we're going to be answering all things Davy family, because today we're talking One Piece's most powerful family explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional Nick video every single week, you guys can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We are on to the last part of Neji versus Hinata, and things are getting poked. But before we get into all that, today we got to talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Factor. Listen, if you want to keep 11 dogs alive, float 4 YouTube channels, and build a house all simultaneously, unfortunately wondering about, what am I going to get from the grocery store to cook for lunch is not a part of your vernacular. And while my life might be a little bit more hectic than yours, I'm sure plenty of you have dreaded the idea of going to the grocery store, figuring out what you want to cook, getting the ingredients, cooking it, all so you can sit down and eat lunch that takes you hours. See, because there's never been a better time to get into Factor than right now, as they recently just doubled their weekly menu, offering their customers 80+ revolving meals to choose from every single week. And within the confines of those 80+ meals every single week, they've also doubled the amount of seafood offerings, now ensuring that more seafood than ever, like shrimp, salmon, and barramundi, is all available in the base plan of Factor at no additional cost. They've also committed themselves to covering basically any kind of dietary needs that anybody who would want to get into Factor would have, be that calorie conscious, high protein, no refined sugars, or vegetarian. But even if you're just picky, they've introduced something known as Protein Swap. Hate chicken but love pork? Cool, that meal that you wanted that has chicken can now have pork. But Nick, Factor's meals, they're a bit too American for me. Well, no longer, as they've also expanded their global cuisine with the launch of new Asian and Mediterranean meals, offering 30+ options. But there's a big difference between telling and showing, so let's head down to the kitchen and crack into some Factor.
Throw it in the microwave for the big 100 and, oh god, it's gotta be on the spinny part. 120 seconds. Remove the film and dig in. We're gonna get a little bit of the cavatappi, a little bit of the chicken, a little bit of the broccoli, and enjoy creamy, savory sauce over perfectly cooked noodles. That is great.
So what are you waiting for? Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code TWCFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and free breakfast for a year. That's code TWCFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Offer only valid with new Factor subscription, customers with code, and qualifying auto-renewing subscription. Take back your day with Factor. So let's start today's video off in the way that we tend to start these kinds of videos off, which is by answering the easy questions. So who are the Davy family? Well, in the simplest sense, they are descendants of the legendary pirate Davy D. Jones. Now, Davy D. Jones, or just Davy Jones as most people call him, lived sometime in the region of 800 to 900 years ago. Now, not much is known about Davy Jones outside of the fact that the D in the middle of his name was lost to history, like with so many other carriers of the Will of D. But we did learn in very recent chapters of One Piece, like the last 3 chapters of the manga, that Rox D. Sebek, a far far off descendant of Davy D. Jones, believed that prior to Emu and the world government ruling the entire One Piece world, Davy D. Jones was the king of the world. That is to say that apparently, according to Rocks, who is Blackbeard's father, Davy D. Jones was supplanted as king of the world by Emu and the world government that was propped up afterwards. However, as to whether or not Emu killed Davy D. Jones, or if he fled the position of king under threat of death, or if he simply just decided that fighting against Emu was not for him, we can't say. The fate of Davy Jones is actually unknown. However, we learned around chapter 300 that the legend that explains the disappearance of Davy Jones is that he was cursed by a demon to live on the ocean floor for the rest of his life. And thus anything that sinks from the top of the ocean down to the ocean floor is said to belong to Davy Jones, which is obviously because that's basically exactly the nautical lore surrounding Davy Jones in our real life world. Or as the ocean floor among sailors in the pirating era was referred to as Davy Jones's locker. Now, because this idea that everything that sinks to the ocean floor becomes Davy Jones's, the idea of the Davy Back or the Davy Back Games or Davy Back Fight, depending on what your translation says, was created. Now, the Davy Back Games or the Davy Back Fight is essentially an accepted way for pirates to take things from each other, whether that be treasures or valuable pirates from their crew. Anything a pirate steals from another pirate is considered a Davy Back. Now, knowing Oda, the idea of this legend of Davy Jones being cursed by a demon to live at the bottom of the seafloor for the rest of his life is probably gonna come back. And considering how we just saw Rocks go out, which was Emu using Dami Reverse Eye on Rocks to not only bend Rocks to his will, we don't know Emu's gender, but also while bending Rocks to Emu's will, Emu told Rocks to wipe out all living beings on God Valley, very much including Rocks' wife and child, Eris and Teach, the two final remnants of the Davy clan. And considering that in this moment Rocks, the most prominent descendant of Davy D. Jones, got possessed by a demon and later had to be killed by Garp and Roger working together, it probably stands to reason that Davy D. Jones was taken out in a similar way, controlled by Emu using Dami Reverse Eye and forced to do something probably so irredeemable that Davy D. Jones threw himself to the bottom of the ocean, where he could no longer be a harm to anybody else. But that is just a theory, obviously. But anyways, flash forward somewhere in the region of 750 to 850 years, because the backstory we get from Rocks and Harold happened 40 years prior to the events of One Piece. 38, technically, but who's counting? And we get a look into the Davy clan, where it's revealed, while even though the Davy clan had been endlessly prosecuted by Emu and the world government as they tried to purge the last vestiges of the lineage of apparently the last king of the world, that the Davy clan was still alive, and they lived on an unincorporated island known as God Valley. Now, God Valley was an unaffiliated with the world's government island that existed in the West Blue, and I'm talking in the past tense here because the God Valley incident that happened 38 years ago leads to the destruction of God Valley as an island. However, because God Valley was unaffiliated with the world government, and therefore by extension the Navy, not only didn't see the citizens of God Valley as people, but also decided that God Valley would be the perfect place to do their tri-annual human hunt, an event that the world government throws every 3 years for those highest in the government, like the Celestial Dragons, the Holy Knights, and maybe even the Five Elders, or those who hold on to the highest stations in the world government get to hunt down an entire island of people, killing them for points. And while for a long time the Davy clan was able to remain alive on multiple different islands, keeping themselves alive by barely eking out a living by working in the underworld, which is a vast network of illegal businesses that elude the control of the world government that's, so far as we know, mostly active in the North and West Blues. It's like the black market, where everything from devil fruits, orphans, to illegal weapons are manufactured and sold. And Don Quixote del Flamingo was said to be the king of the underworld until Dressrosa came around and Luffy dismantled his entire underground crime syndicate. However, after spending a fair amount of time eking out a living in the underworld, the Davy clan decided that they wanted a united home, and thus they all moved to God Valley in hopes that the world government would never find them there. And thus Rocks D. Zebek, whose birth name is actually Davy D. Zebek, however he changed his birth name in order to avoid suspicion, decided to send his wife Eris and his child Teach to live on God Valley because he understood, 1, on God Valley they should be outside of the reach of the world government, and 2, on God Valley the rest of the Davy clan would watch over his family for him. However, unfortunately for Rocks, eventually one of the Holy Knights, or the Knights of God, Fingerling Garling, who was the father of Shanks, and Shamrock, I guess, not only learned of the island's existence and therefore its unaffiliation from the world government, but also learned that the last bastion of the Davy family lived on this island. And thus he nominated God Valley to be the hosting site of the next next native hunting competition. Because while the world government loves hunting down random people from unaffiliated islands, they also need special extra rare rabbits. And thus the members of the Davy clan that were round up in the initial invasion of God Valley were denoted to have higher point values if you were the one to kill them. And thus Figurlin Garland, who was already a shoo-in to win this native hunting competition and win the top prize of Shaki, the world's most beautiful woman who eventually ends up with Silver's Rayleigh, owning and operating a bar in, of all places, Sabaody Archipelago, which is literally attached to Marijois. Figurlin Garland also got a boost to his status on account of the fact that he found the last remnants of the Davy clan. But why is Emu and the rest of the world government so incredibly afraid of the Davy clan? Well, because the most prominent theme in One Piece that runs from the beginning of One Piece up until last week's chapter is the fact that fascist governments will try to control information. And more than that, they will explicitly try to erase certain historical events from the history books, so the history that's told worldwide is not only convenient, but also paints the world government in a positive light. This is why they wiped Ohara off the map, why they're trying to enslave the giants and destroy their library of knowledge, and why they're trying to destroy the Davy clan, as any and all remaining existence of the Davy clan proves that at one point Emu and the world government were not in charge, a reality that Emu and the world government have been trying to make sure that nobody is aware of, well, ever since the beginning of One Piece. And when Rox became aware that God Valley was going to be the site of the next native hunting competition, we saw that he mobilized his pirates to get to God Valley under the premise that they'd have all the riches, treasures, and shakis they could possibly want, while he committed himself to saving his wife and child. And thus, in what was vindictively renamed by the fans the Goon Valley Incident, Rox, a character that we were just introduced to less than a dozen chapters ago, proved himself to be the greatest of men amongst a generation of supposedly great men. However, unfortunately, because the God Valley Incident goes so sideways, with Garp, the Rox pirates, the Rogers pirates, the Holy Knights, the Five Elders, and Emu all pulling up, eventually Emu takes over St. Saturn and begins to use his wide-sweeping Dami Reverse Eye to turn the supposedly already powerful Davy clan into his demons. And because of this, Rox is actually forced to, during the God Valley Incident, to cut down his own father and grandmother, who are being controlled using the Dami Reverse Eye of Emu. Ties into the fact that there was a native hunting competition going on before this, and Rox was, against his will, forced to snuff out some of the last remaining embers of the Davy clan. And that situation only got worse for Rox when he himself was brought under the influence of Dami Reverse Eye, and forced by Emu to chase down Eris, his wife, and teach his child, and attempt to snuff them out. An attempt that, if successful, would have completely destroyed the Davy lineage forever. However, because Kuma was able to eat the pawpaw fruit, and because Kuma is probably the best character in all of One Piece, he was able to get to Eris and teach before Rox was able to cut them down using his saber and fly them off to some faraway island, ensuring that the Davy clan would live on through them. Because unfortunately, it was on God Valley that Rox's story would come to an end. Because even though Rox was rampaging under the control of Emu, his sorrow was evident as he cut down innocents or members of his own pirate crew against his will, and thus out of respect for his legendary status as a pirate and to get rid of him as a threat, Vice Admiral Garp and future King of the Pirates Gold D. Roger worked together to cut him down, leaving only Eris, his wife, and Marshall D. Teach, his son, as the remaining members of the Davy clan. And as we haven't seen Eris in the current timeline, it's rather safe to assume that she's no longer around, which means that the only remaining member of the lineage that ties their roots back to the previous king of the world is Blackbeard. And the only people that know this are the Five Elders and Blackbeard's 10 Titanic captains. Proven by the fact that Katarina, one of Blackbeard's captains, knows that he's a descendant of Davy Jones. And thus this begs the question, will Blackbeard be the next king of the world, the person to replace Emu? And quite honestly, the only answer I can give is maybe. See, because Davy Jones exists separate from Joy Boy. This point is established by the fact that when Rox is facing off against Emu during the God Valley Incident, he yells at Emu, "Who are you more afraid of, Davy D. Jones or Joy Boy?" Implying that while Davy Jones and Joy Boy probably fought on the same side of the conflict against Emu and the soon-to-be world government, they were separate peoples. Ties into the fact that one of the world nobles present at the God Valley native hunting competition believed because of the size of the Davy clan members that they were buccaneers, and another tie is drawn between the Davy clan and Joy Boy. See, because while there's no confirmation of exactly what race the original Joy Boy was, the buccaneers, specifically Kuma and his father, worship Nika. And what we've learned is that Joy Boy is the reincarnation of the god of the sun, Nika, the inheritor of the mythical human fruit model Nika. And the widely accepted reason that the Buccaneers specifically worship Nika is because the Joy Boy that battled alongside Davy Jones and his giant iron robot against the world government in Emu was most likely a Buccaneer, backed up by the fact that the straw hat that we see in the captivity of Emu is gigantic, but not like gigantic, but rather like Buccaneer gigantic. That is to say that the straw hat in Emu's possession is too big for a regular human, but too small for a giant, and thus it must have belonged to somebody somewhere in the middle. And as Buccaneers are somewhere in the region of 15 or so feet tall, it would stand to reason that this someone in the middle was most likely a Buccaneer. Tie this into Rox's giant size and Blackbeard's giant size, and to the fact that the Buccaneers, much like descendants of the Davy clan, are either enslaved or eradicated by the world government, and it seems fair to assume that there is not only a fair amount of connection between the Davy clan and the Buccaneers, but also between the Davy clan and Joy Boy. But why is all of this important? Well, because, well, many have speculated for a long time that Blackbeard is going to be the final enemy of One Piece. Rather, there's also a possibility where Blackbeard regains his rightful throne. A possibility where Luffy and Blackbeard work together to defeat Emu, something that their ancestors in the previous Joy Boy and Davy D. Jones were unable to do. And rather than Blackbeard being the final enemy of One Piece, he could be the final ally of Luffy. Two of them bringing their massive strength together to destroy the world's government. Two vestiges of the past in Joy Boy and the Davy clan that Emu and the world government have tried to erase for hundreds of years. Now, there is also the possibility that after Blackbeard and Luffy work together to destroy Emu, that Luffy says the world doesn't need a king and therefore takes down Blackbeard, and considering Blackbeard's moral ambiguity, it would kind of be a stretch to ask the fans to desire him to be the king of the world after Emu, and therefore it seems to me the more logical writing choice, that is, at least if I was Oda's editors, would be for Blackbeard to not be the next king, but hey, who can say? But what I can say for certain right now, amongst the 4 emperors of the sea, there is not only one Joy Boy, but also one descendant of Davy D. Jones. And if the mural that we saw in Elbath that showed us the first world, the second world, and the third world is any indicator of what has happened in One Piece and what is to come in One Piece, it seems as though the world is presenting a unified front in the battle against Emu. And the 3 central figures in that battle against Emu are Joy Boy, Joy Boy's robot, and a monstrously tall horned figure that many have assumed for a long time is one of the giants, possibly Loki, but also could be representative of a demon, a tall, powerful demon, a buccaneer, if you shall. And considering the fact that Davy Jones's backstory is that he was turned into a demon, most likely by Emu, this representation of this possibly demonic character fighting back against Emu could represent the descendant of the Davy clan. But who knows? It could also be a giant. Who knows? I'm curious to hear from you guys. What did you think about the God Valley incident, and what do you think is going to spin out of all this new information we learned about the Davy clan? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I got way more work done today than I thought I was going to, so I guess I'm gonna go play Arc Raiders.